So I wanted to talk today about gender and the misconceptions of what gender is and the state of play between men and women. And I wanted to start with a stat that never gets less confronting, and that is that 1 woman a week is murdered by an intimate partner in Australia every week. And then when you look at the bigger picture of that, 2 out of 3 of the people that get murdered each year are men. So this isn't just violence that's happening towards women, it's violence that's happening towards men, on men violence, and then you've got the violence that men are perpetrating against themselves in the rates of suicide that still, aren't going down. So what is happening for men? What environment are we making that is causing men such turmoil that this is the state of play we find ourselves in today?
If there is any problem, we need to take 100 steps back away from the problem before we attempt to even understand what the end result is. If we only just take a few steps back, we're still in the conundrum, we're still in the momentum of what led to that problem. And at best, we will only find some solutions, at best. And if you take it 100 steps back, we may end up being at the toddler stage of that child and have a look to see where the natural tenderness of that boy can end up being many, many years later in a situation where domestic violence is the only expression left for that boy, for that young man, for the adult man to express himself.
Yeah, because a baby boy is not born a brute. The brutishness, the roguishness, all these things that we define as masculinity is conditioned. It's learned.
Yeah, I've raised a couple of boys myself and my wife, and I've had that experience, direct experience, but I've observed it also with others. Every boy is very, very tender by nature. They know how to treat another little girl, another baby that's younger than them. The tenderness just exudes. It comes out, it's natural, it's inbuilt, it's not even parented at that age, it's natural. So something is going on that is changing that nature to become something that is as abhorrent as it is, as is domestic violence.
There's this beautiful Facebook post that was going around, and it's a picture of, I think they're about 3 or 4-year-old boys, and they're nursing babies like dolls, and they're feeding the dolls, and the caption reads, "Boys will be boys." And the juxtaposition of that just makes you realise that that's not the tagline that goes with boys that will be boys usually. And we talk about the entrapment of women and the ideals that are placed on women of how they've got to be. But actually, the state for men is even more dire in some regards, because we haven't got to the point where a man can even voice that an ideal or belief being placed on him is contra to who he naturally is. We haven't actually pulled apart and said, no, wait a sec, these ideas that men are violent, that they're brutish, all of this, that's actually anti-man. But there hasn't truly been a men's movement that has broken out and said that this violence is hurting us, it's hurting the women in our lives. What will it take for men to start actually voicing that they want out of the prison that is man-made?
You're asking for us to have a process by which we can analyse the problem. We're once again looking at that approach. And if we are not prepared to take the 100 steps back before we address it, we're going to get in trouble. If you strip back a man by 30 steps, he's going to panic because he doesn't know who he is. Once you start removing all the steps he has needed to, or he has thought himself that he needed to become in order to be a man in society. Once you start stripping them back, the man starts to panic. They don't know who they are because they don't have a foundation away from the stereotypical characterizations that they have to pursue in order to become who they become. So we've got to do it in a way that provides an environment for them to feel very safe in order to be stripped back and realize that violence is actually impossible for any gender. And yet we have violence that is very, very possible. So the human condition needs to be examined from the point of view that we have behaviors that are impossible, and yet it's our reality that it is our reality that these behaviors exist.
That's really true what you're saying about the fact that the strip back and the panic, because that goes for men and women in terms of how they view men. Because a woman, you know, we've got these ideals that come with women too, where they say, you know, like, I like a tough guy, or you know, like that they like to be treated rough, this kind of, they go for the men that are going to treat them bad, this ridiculous setup. What is it that women are bringing that actually stunt men in their true expression?
Yeah, it's exactly the same approach. No gender is worse off than the other. They're both equally not where they should be in truth. And for a woman, it's the same thing. You quoted an axiom there, and it's a complete falsity that a woman likes a tough man. The fact that she seeks a tough man simply means that she's not willing to be fragile and tender in herself, and therefore wants something that can exist above the toughness that she has sought, and therefore if you go for tougher, it makes you look tender by comparison. Right. But the reality is that, you know, we're both very, very fragile genders, and that fragility is not a disempowering. It's not a weakness that we have as a human condition. It's not a weakness of our species. It's actually a beauty. Sensitivity allows us to communicate and relate at a level that we have until now not experienced as a community, let alone as a global species.
So how do you sell fragility? Because that freaks people out. You know, the idea of fragility sounds like frail. It sounds like I won't be able to survive in the workforce. I won't be able to basically survive as my gender. What is the truth of fragility?
Well, that's it. You define the truth of what fragility is, and then nobody will have a problem with it. But if we continue to use it in the sense that it's a weak, pathetic and disempowering position to be fragile, then we will avoid it at all costs. But we are fragile by nature. We are very, very tender. You only need to hurt one of your fingers just to know that it's impossible to exist with one finger down. And yet we take it for granted when we have all 10, you know, when they're uncut. But you only have to hurt one of them at the kitchen table when you're preparing food to know that the next lot of food is almost unpreparable.
You certainly can't do the dishes.
Exactly. So we need to understand that is a great analogy of how fragile we are and how delicate we are, to the point where if you have to wrap up your thumb, it's almost like your whole life is turned upside down because one small part of your body is not functioning well or not operating at its optimum.
It brings us back to that sense that it's the whole or nothing. Like, we are a wholeness that often we don't respect, and we don't respect it in terms of gender as well, because the women's movement has gotten bogged down in a fight. In a lot of ways, there's a fight against men, but when you look at it, we are both here. We are both being gendered conditioned to be not who we are, and here we are kind of missing each other and missing the point. But tenderness becomes a common thread, doesn't it?
Look, if we strip it back 100 steps, step number 91 in the opposite direction will tell us that we've got a society that is banking on producing and cultivating what we are not. We have an intelligence that is based on the lack of the beingness. In other words, so we don't have the whole being being looked after by the education system. And parenting is actually preparing children to be part of this education system, when in fact we are missing the point of what parenting is. which is to bring the being into the reality of the world. And the education system should foster that being into the education system, not change and hide and subdue the being to fit into a function that actually performs for the system itself. That is our problem. We are lacking in developing who we truly are, and we are throwing out into society something that is modeled on the lack of who we truly are, and that's the lack of the wholeness that you speak of.
So we work in parts because if we were full, what would a full woman and what would a full man look like? Because obviously there is differences that aren't just physical between men and women, but what are they? Because we have very detailed gender ideas of what man and woman is, but nobody seems to be able to get to the essence. You know, you hear of parents that raise their child and give them a androgynous sounding name and won't refer to him as she or him, like this is in the most extreme cases, because they don't want their child to be gender conditioned in any way. But obviously that's a bit of a reaction to the world we're living in. So what is the truth of the difference between the genders?
What we need to do is qualify the characteristics of people for a commonality that we are in essence, and then let the gender express that in all the beauty and flavoursome that comes with being a woman and with being a man. The moment we say you are this because you are a man and you are this because you are a woman, we isolate and diminish in many ways the wholeness of the being. So if we say you are naturally beautiful, you are naturally gorgeous, you are naturally spunky, sexy, vivacious, gay, expressive, communicative, open, honest, humble, cherished, adored, and if we imbue that and if we foster that, then we let every individual have its own flavour of what those words mean. And that fostered develops the type of adult we want in society. And that won't have a model in the sense that you can't be unique, but it'll be modelled on a commonality where we are all sharing in the qualities of those true words.
And that brings it to the end game, really, which is the harmony between us, to a much deeper way of relating and to an intimacy between people.
Yeah, the end game is to produce a human being that is able to relate to another in that joy and in that softness and fragility and sensitivity. We can't just ask a man to be sensitive when he's been modelled on toughness and diminished to hold back who he truly is. And likewise, a woman who has been fighting and vying to try to look like something and cannot look like something she is not. So we need to just develop what is there naturally and glorify it. And in that glorification, they understand that they are who they are. And then that's where the natural spunkness starts to come out.
Love that, the spunkness.
Yeah, I'm still old-fashioned, and I grew up with cartoons when the jingle was a gay old time, and spunkness is a lovely word, and we shouldn't lose that old expressions that represent us who we truly are.
Absolutely.